Welcome to day 2 of the Together 2020 International Disability Film Festival, brought to you with the generous support of Arts Council England and the National Lottery Community Fund and Emergency Fund. This morning we're looking at the power in a union. Usually on a Thursday and Friday of this festival, we have a 2-day intensive workshop for filmmakers. We decided with the screen fatigue and everybody's need to just reposition themselves a bit before we move forward again, that it would be better to break this up into 6 shorter sessions, which are all related to working in the age of COVID. So this morning we're looking at the benefits of trade union membership, the support they can offer, and also the responsibilities that filmmakers have towards actors. And then this afternoon, we've got the second of our practical sessions on filming in the age of COVID-19, when we have Vicky Rayford-Sinnott from Little Cog and Mandy Colleran, the actor, talking about how they made the film Funny Peculiar, which is one of the films that we're showing in our Powerful Women programme tonight. And so I'm delighted to introduce Dan Edge from Equity, the Actors Union. We also have our interpreter, Chris Burrow, and our captioner, Katie from Global Real-Time Captioning. If you'd like to use the captions, then click on CC at the bottom of the screen. On some devices, you may need to hover your cursor over the controls to get Zoom to reveal them. There's also a Q&A box where you can type questions and make points. And additionally, there is the live chat box. If you go to view on the top left-hand corner of your screen and go to show chat, then you'll be able to... and we have already a very helpful contribution from Ernest Bow, who says that it's the Broadcasting, Entertainment, Communications and Theatre Union.
Yes.
So basically, if you're not an actor, you join Equity, you join BEC2. So thank you for that, Ernest. I think it did change slightly. I'm sure when I was a member in the 80s, God, that was a long time ago, wasn't it? We were still talking about cinematographic, but of course now communications cover so many other things. So yes, if you haven't got a line of typing up on your right-hand side, you have not got live chat up. So you've got the option of using that as well as the Q&As. But I'm going to hand over to Dan now to talk a little bit about his background and what Equity specifically does for disabled members and, of course, the Disabled Members Council.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving me an excuse to wear a shirt during lockdown too. I haven't had many of them. My name is Dan Edge, and by trade I am an actor, a model, and a professional wrestler, and an aerial performer. I'm one of those guys that kind of does a bit of everything. But also I am currently vice chair of Equity, which, like Drew has said, is the performers trade union. Also, we do have some guys that work behind the scenes, but not as many as BEC2. BEC2 is one of our sister unions, because we're all part of this wonderful group called the Federation of Entertainment Unions. But we mainly look after performers, but we do have some directors, some designers, some stage managers, as well as every kind of performer you can imagine. Be actors, dancers, models, pro wrestlers, anybody that performs. Equity generally is your trade union. Like I say, I am vice chair of the Deaf and Disabled Members Committee, whose sole task is to focus on the needs and requirements of deaf and disabled members. I've been on the committee now for the best part of a decade. I started in trade unionism simply because when I was doing my degree in drama, I became a student member of Equity, because I grew up in a generation where everybody went, to be an actor, you should be part of Equity. That's the law, isn't it? You can't perform unless you're part of Equity, which wasn't the law at the time, but it used to be. thanks to Margaret Thatcher, that all changed, but we won't get into that. So I applied to be a student member, and the then Deaf and Disabled Members Committee had what we call an open meeting, which basically means the committee has an open meeting, and to anybody that is an equity member, you can go to that meeting and talk to the Deaf and Disabled Members Committee and see what work we're doing and so on and so forth. So I went to one of these meetings, and it was just before the next round of the elections were due, because we have to get elected by the membership to be on the committee. So we are run by members, for members. It's all kind of working together. And while I was at that open meeting, I proceeded to ask various questions because I was new. And the then chair of the committee sort of pulled me to one side and said, if you don't stand for election, I'm going to come and find you. So that was kind of my introduction to trade unionism, and I've been knee deep in it ever since. So that's a bit about me and how I got started. As for the trade union itself, the work we do is vast and wide and huge. Our main purpose is, of course, to look after our members. That is what a trade union does. So we tackle everything from discrimination cases to campaigning to improve employment law, to lobbying Parliament, to just educating the industry on how things need to improve and be better. So the union's work is vast. And the Deaf and Disabled Members Committee probably has one of the longest lists of work of all the working bodies within the trade union. Simply because the work we need to do is vast in terms of equality, in terms of, what deaf and disabled talent deserves, what deaf and disabled talent need, and the support. So the work we do is vast. A lot of the work we do is educational in the fact that, people will often approach us and go, I want to work with deaf and disabled talent, but I don't have a clue what to do. Am I doing it right? I don't know. So, we do talk to a lot of people, but at the same time, we'll also rap people over the knuckles when they need it occasionally, and say, you're doing it wrong because this is the law and this is what you should be doing, and you're not living up to that requirement. But we're not necessarily the villains of producers and film creators. Please don't think we're there just to wrap you over the knuckles, because we would rather help you out to begin with and give you the information in advance, so then we don't have to come and wrap you over the knuckles later on. So, it's one of those things. It's just about making the workplace safer, better and more creative and accessible for deaf and disabled talent throughout the industry. That's the Deaf and Disabled Committee's role. That's what I aim to do. And I mean, like I say, we cover every part of the industry. So we cover singers, we cover dancers. Some of the work I was doing pre-COVID, because obviously, like I'm sure many of you are aware and can totally understand, since COVID has happened, that has become a lot of the union's main focus. But pre-COVID, I was doing work along the lines of getting more deaf and disabled performers into video games, to do motion capture and voiceover work, because that's an area of work that there needs to be more deaf and disabled talent, and there isn't, and it's a very young industry. So we're trying to improve their practice from the ground up. We're doing work with our partners at Spotlight and the CDG, the Casting Directors Guild, to put together a database of accessible casting venues so that casting directors can no longer have the excuse of, I can't see disabled talent because I don't know any accessible casting venues. We recently released a guide for casting directors and producers on best practice of working with deaf and hard of hearing talent, that's available on the website, free for anybody to grab and use. We're constantly releasing guides to how to work best with talent, what your requirements are in terms of employment law if you're going to engage talent, deaf and disabled or otherwise. And also, you know, this talk is about the power of the union. For example, Equity is the first trade union in the world to reach an agreement with Netflix to give actors minimum requirements of what is expected from Netflix in terms of pay and conditions. We are the first trade union in the world to do that. So that is the power of the union, is to hold employers to account and improve conditions.
Excellent. And of course, one of the reasons we wanted to have this talk is that a number of actors move into becoming filmmakers. And indeed, there are people, I think it's just inevitable as well for disabled people. If you can't get, we were talking a little bit yesterday about producing, if you can't get a producer, if you can't get a director, you end up moving into doing it yourself. But so, you know, we very much have actors list and indeed dancers, performers. I was so interested in what you were saying about gaming, because on our live stream Together Unlocked, we have a weekly feature on gaming. And because we've been really trying to make people realize, yes, it's an art form. It employs actors and designers and artists and producers and directors, and it still hasn't been seen within that mainstream as an integral part of the arts. But of course, and Netflix, you know, such a kind of growing source of work for actors and filmmakers, and yet it's been very much unregulated so far, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's because theatre and television have been around for the best part of a century. Netflix and video games, not so much. So it's new industries, and it's one of those things, especially with something like gaming, is that it's a young industry. So if we as a union can set terms and conditions and agreements with the makers of games now, it saves us work in the long run. We don't have to undo bad habits. And very much so. Last year in where are we now? In 2020. So it was either late 2018, early 2019. Forgive me, I can't remember the date. But the Equity Deaf and Disabled Members Committee held a world first event where we got professionals throughout the gaming industry to meet deaf and disabled performers for the first time and talk about making the industry more accessible and allowing deaf and disabled performers to see how motion capture worked, to see how voiceovers in video games could work. Just for an afternoon, it wasn't, a long-term thing. And again, pre-COVID, sadly, it's put the brakes on it at the moment, but we're looking at working with some of the partners we work with on that event to open up a series of workshops so more deaf and disabled talent can start to access that work. Because this basically started because I was talking to a colleague of mine within the union that works in video games, and I'd done some motion capture training myself. And they said, you'd make a great zombie in video games because your physicality is so different. You'd make great monsters and zombies. Why are we not using you to do that stuff? And like I say, my colleague, who is the chair of Equity's Screen and New Media Committee, Lawrence Bavard, said, actually, yeah, why aren't you? And she used all her contacts within the gaming world because she's worked in games for a long, long time. And we set up this event and we're looking to move forward. We've got partners in UKI, which is the Games Creators Union. So all the programmers and those kind of people are in UKI. And we're trying to move that forward. And in terms of what we call the Svod platform, so SVOD, streaming video on demand, companies like Netflix and Disney Plus, BritBox, and all those kind of companies, there wasn't agreements in place because this was a whole new world. And like I say, we were the first union to agree terms and conditions with Netflix for all our performers in the world. We beat the Americans, we beat everybody in the world to doing so. And they're now using our work as a template to agree worldwide sort of agreements for talent all over the world. And we're in negotiations with all the other SVOD platforms, so your Disney Pluses, your Amazon Primes, to make it an industry-wide thing.
So one of the things I was thinking about Netflix and indeed some of the other companies is they're really investing, aren't they, in production in this country. So those kind of agreements are really critical. Where do you see, I mean, I know everybody talks about the lack of work, but where do you see post-COVID, if you like, more work coming for disabled actors?
I think in terms of actors and COVID, it's been a weird sort of scenario in the fact that, and I was watching your stream with Justin Edgar last night, because there's a guy that looks vaguely familiar in one of his films. um,
Yes.
and he was saying that, it's in some ways it's opened some doors and closed some others, and you were saying how, meetings are now happening on Zoom where people said they couldn't happen before. And I think in terms of auditions, especially for deaf and disabled talent, um, it's opening some doors in some cases. But also with our work on the Deaf and Disabled Members Committee, we're well aware that Zoom and some of the requirements that are being asked of talent, in terms of auditioning and time schedules and turnarounds, just isn't achievable because of people's, requirements, access requirements. So we're constantly in conversation to try and help casting directors understand that people's access requirements mean they might need more time, they might not be able to light it themselves, and all these things need to be taken into consideration. So it opened doors, but it also creates its own new things that we need to overcome and construct. But I think in terms that now people see Zoom as a viable option and other platforms as a viable option, it's been beneficial.
Yes, I mean, you really made me think that yes, one of our young actors, shall we say, is having to re-audition for they had to defer their place because they were on the shielding list, and now London South Bank have changed the course and changed the course requirements. Oh, you need to send in a new video audition, and the sort of not only the stress it's created, but also, if you don't have broadband, you're using a mobile phone. London South Bank happily say, oh, yes, just everybody's got to upload it to YouTube. And I get text going, well, all right, she has an auntie that does know how to upload to YouTube. But if I look at the vast majority of our young people in Newham who are doing performing arts, going to an audition, however challenging, being in that real place, and that's the sort of feedback I'm having from the sort of video auditions for things like courses, was just that they get so much strength from seeing the other applicants, from all being in it together, to have a real sense of the venue or the academic institution or the drama school. And I think that's where, there's just this assumption, like you say, that how do you film if you live on your own and you can't actually kind of control a phone properly? Or how does your audition compare if your support worker's held up their phone as opposed to somebody else who's got lighting and tripod and, mum and dad in the business who are able to help them? So, yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with you. It's leveled up in some ways, but I think also the stress and anxiety, I think, is much, much greater, particularly for stage workers, where suddenly you're making this transfer to film, but you're doing it yourself. And your whole job is going to depend on it.
And I think that's part of what the Deaf and Disabled Members Committee is trying to achieve, because as well, obviously, in sort of post-COVID world, there's worries about people with, and I hate the term, but underlying conditions, and whether they're going to be employed and they're safe to employ and everything and so on and so forth. The union is, of course, battling, going under the Equality Act. You cannot deny employing these people. So the union, and it's why I would recommend anybody join a union, because working in the arts as a freelancer, whether it be as a producer, as a director, as an actor, can be a very, very lonely place, because you are on your own, technically. So being in a union means you're all of a sudden not on your own, and you have somebody that's willing to go to bat for you, even if it's something as simple as, if you're a deaf and disabled performer, you may have issues around work and benefits, for example. Not picking on anybody's prime example, but I've had issues myself over the past. Um, I went to Equity and said to their benefits and welfare advisor, I'm having these issues. What can I do? And then the union went to bat for me. So it means you're not on your own. And that's the power of collectiveness and being in a union. And that's why I would recommend joining to anybody. We also offer lots of other things like pensions and funeral benefits and all the kind of boring stuff. But it's boring stuff that's important, that you don't necessarily think about as a creative and don't necessarily have access to if you're entirely on your own.
Yes, so let's just explore some of those boring things, and then we'll go back and look at how you join and who's eligible. But yeah, I mean, I think things like pensions, again, I mean, I've been working, I was a BEC2 member, I was an NUJ member, but over the last 20 years, I've been working almost entirely as a visual artist. It's only really since March, when we've launched the live stream, that I'm thinking, well, I'm presenting and I'm engineering and I'm producing, I'll think about rejoining BEC2. I don't know. I mean, what, in terms of, because we have no union at all in the visual arts. So there is literally nobody. You can't go to anybody for benefits advice. You can't go to anybody for a cheap pension or cheap insurance. A couple of times I've noticed people attempting to set up unions. They've never managed it. And so, we cover, for example, in the festival, so many different art forms, but it's only visual art where the artists, if anything, are expected to pay for the venue, rather than the gallery paying them to exhibit. The artist on exhibition, even in a publicly funded gallery, can be the only person not being paid. There's very little access to anything other than through, well, AN, Artist Newsletter, which is seen as a professional body, but it's nothing like a trade union. So it's been very strange to go from 25 years in the trade union movement. And the last two, I was a co-chair of TUDA, the Trade Union Disability Alliance, with the late Caroline Gooding, and she was, throughout the history of the Disability Rights Commission, she was head of legal policy. So it's very odd to kind of move into this fine art world where there's no trade unions at all. So yeah, tell us about the boring stuff, because it's actually really helpful.
Okay, well, in terms of the stuff that Equity offer, if you become an Equity member, for example, you automatically, as part of your membership, have £10 million of public liability insurance in your back pocket. So, God forbid anything happens to a member of the public or another performer while you're working, you're covered. Um, if there's a contract dispute because you feel that your contracts are not being met, Equity will support you in that, and they will do so to the point that they will not name you. You can go to Equity in confidence until it reaches a point where they might have to name you for whatever reason, but that will be communicated to you and you can make that decision come what may. But Equity will go to bat for you as the union, and they won't go, John Bloggs in the corner over there said, da, 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 da. That's not what Equity does. Equity says, a member has come to us with these concerns, they need to be addressed, how are we going to do it? And depending on the case and what it involves and how it gets rectified, it may go to court, it may not, we may be able to rectify it quickly. But then you also have access to the members' pension scheme, which is run throughout the union in partnership with a big insurance company. It's a really good pension. I had a friend that was in pensions look at it for me, to the point that our income fluctuates as self-employed people, as independents, as freelancers. So you can set up to pay into it regularly, or you can go, I need a payment break this month, and take a payment break from your pension if the funding just isn't there. Also, if you end up working for some of the bigger broadcasters like the BBC and ITV and Channel 4 and those kind of broadcasters, and you tell them you have an equity pension, they will automatically pay into it because they're all part of the scheme. There's also funeral benefits, benefits advice. During the coronavirus period, we have what's called the Equity Benevolent Fund, which is for people in times of hardship. Equity Put, we had some spare money, thankfully, that was going to go towards other projects. But Equity put £1 million into the Benevolent Fund that members could apply for, because obviously so many people are out of work due to COVID. So it really is one of the biggest support networks, but it's also a huge support network that will go to bat for you if things need to happen. But it's also a support network, like I say, that's run, the way Equity is run is by members for members. So if you have an issue and you want Equity to try and do something about it, you have to let Equity know. If we don't know, we can't do anything about it. So we want our members to be as engaged as possible.
And how do people join, and who's eligible?
So in terms of joining Equity, to be eligible, you need to have earned across however many jobs you like, but you need to have earned and have a way of proving £500 of professional earnings. If you're not a student, if you're a student, it's slightly different. If you're a student doing a degree or such in an art form, you can apply to be a student member just and prove that you're on an accredited course or a recognised course. So I did a drama degree at the University of Northampton when I joined, and I went, here's the proof that I'm doing my drama degree. They went, here's your student membership. And I think student membership at last check, please don't quote me on this, but when I joined, it was £10 a year for student membership. But if you're working, and then after student membership, once you've graduated,
sorry, Dan, can I just ask, do students get the same benefits as other members?
Yes. Yes. I'm not entirely sure about the pension, but as far as I know, yes, there is no difference. You're just a student member. Once you graduate from your course, your student membership will then last for another 2 years before you have to then have enough proof of work to renew your membership as a full member. So you've got sort of 2 years to earn the minimum £500 from professional work across as many jobs as it takes. So you might do one job for £100, you might do another job for £1,000. Congratulations, you've earned enough to be a member.
And it's not a bad bar, is it? You know, £500 is not a considerable earnings bar.
No, I mean, for some it is challenging. We know that, and
I think it is challenging. Given, I mean, when you were talking about modelling, you know, in the past I've done quite a bit of idents and things for people like the BBC, and you get paid a pittance. The only difference is if you're disabled, they might send a car for you. But yes, I can absolutely see that it's quite a few idents or modelling jobs, but still, it's something you can look at as a goal and think it's an achievable goal.
Indeed. And like I say, it doesn't matter how many jobs it's over, as long as it's sort of, I think the limit is within sort of 3 years. But even then, if they're outside of the 3 years, you can approach the union and say, look, here's my proof of work. For example, if you are a deaf and disabled performer and you've got £500, if you approach Equity and say, look, it's over a little bit longer time period, there may well be dispensation, because at the end of the day, Equity's job is to look after members. And so, there's negotiation there, but generally it's £500 of earnings across however many jobs. Once you've got that proof of £500, you can become a full-blown member. And then in terms of membership fees, they vary depending on how much you earn. So if you're a top A-lister Ian McKellen, your membership's going to be more expensive than a freelancer. I think standard membership at the moment is about £11 a month for those that are Christian on sort of the lowest membership fee. But like I say, it depends on your earnings.
Yeah, and to be honest, when I look at the cost of liability insurance and so on, really and truly, if you're a low earner, then you're going to be spending that amount on things like insurance anyway. Because if you don't, you can't work. You can't do a children's storytelling session in a library, or
Exactly.
indeed a poetry session unless you've got that liability insurance.
Exactly, and it's £10 million by standard, and that's across all art forms. And then if you decide you want to become a stuntman or woman or person, and then or you want to add extra insurances on the top because you want more coverage, that's also an option. Obviously, there's extra costs incurred with that, but there are you get £10 million by standard, and then if you want extras because you're going to start throwing fire around, for example, or you're a professional wrestler and you want more cover, there's options.
Yes, I remember in the period when I just finished my PhD and wasn't working regularly, I remember a wonderful freelance stage management job at a venue in Brixton where the kerosene for the fire eaters was just running down the back corridor, and the organisers were standing there holding sparklers, and it put me off bonfire night absolutely for life. But at
Oh
least if,
dear.
if there'd been some extra insurance, I would have been pleased. But yes, I think I've seen quite a lot of what performers may get up to, and certainly everybody around them needs insurance as well. So how do people apply? Is it an online process now, or is there help available if you can't do that?
There is. It's generally an online process just to make things easier. But if that's not accessible to you, you can email Equity and somebody will get back to you if that's accessible to you. You can phone Equity and say, I'd like to become a member, but the website isn't accessible to me. Can you talk me through it? Can you tell me what I need to do? Can I bring stuff in? Can I post it? So yeah, there's various options in joining as a member. If if you have access requirements, contact Equity in the way that's most accessible to you, and they'll work with you to get your membership sorted.
Because I was particularly thinking, we have an associate drama company, Act Up Newham CIC, and they're a community company and a training company. And for the members with learning difficulties, they're really having to do all of their training with Act Up Newham, just because the local situation means that it's almost impossible to get onto performing arts courses at 16. I know nationally it's much more difficult at 18, but locally at 16. All of them, all of the ones I'm thinking of have English as an additional language. So do their parents. They don't have good data access. They go through phones. So it's really heartening to hear that the group of actors who could be most exploited because they're least able to be able to access something like the digital world, that there is that support available. With a company like that, I mean, do you have, I mean, I know it has to be a sort of recognized course, but do you have any sort of outreach for, particularly for disabled, is there anything particular? You talked about doing events around gaming. Is there anything else Equity does specifically for deaf and disabled performers?
Um, well, the Deaf and Disabled Members Committee is always a point of contact for deaf and disabled performers. So and our lovely Ian Mambold, who was due to be here today instead of me, but sadly he's not well at the moment, is our lead diversity officer. So he's the full member of staff in terms of diverse groups within the union. And is a great human signpost. He will point you in the direction of the people you need to talk to, if it's not him himself. So in terms of outreach, though, if groups would like Equity to come and talk to them, so somebody like Ian or myself, and have conversations about how to move forward, the simplest answer is get in contact with us and we'll see what we can do. Because we want as many people engaged with the union as possible, um, whether it be as a performer or indeed as a producer and a creator, um, because it's power in numbers. The more people we engage with, the more people are working in better conditions. So it may not necessarily be a speedy process all of the time, but if those kind of groups want to reach out to us and see what we can do, because I know we would love more learning disabled artists within the union, because there aren't enough, and they have a lived experience that I myself, as somebody with cerebral palsy, and a lot of our other disabled members and deaf members don't, and their experience is just as valid and just as important. So we would love more learning disabled members of the union. So yes, reach out to us and we'll try and organise something.
Will do. And obviously, we'll also be sharing this video. And I think there's a lot of companies out there who probably are thinking, well, actually, we haven't done enough. And maybe now in the age of COVID, we should be. But I've also, in my time, been quite shocked when I've worked as a performer, not only at how low the union membership is, but the expectations. And without naming names, I've worked for a couple of very high profile disability companies where, yeah, I've been really shocked at how the performers have been spoken to and what the working conditions are. When I've had this discussion with other international disability arts leaders, there's been a kind of feeling that as disabled people, we feel we have to be grateful and we can't rock the boat. Because the other thing that's really struck me over the last 20 years or so is if I work in areas where most people aren't disabled, and you look particularly at younger artists, but all kinds of performers, they have their own companies. They do this with this friend and they do this with this friend, and they belong to this company and they belong to that company, but they're very, very proactive. And yet there's very few disabled performers coming through and setting up their own companies or running their own projects. When we set up Together 2012, we thought we'd have masses of support because Newham was the main host borough. We have the lowest level of cultural engagement in the UK. But no, it was very much kind of, well, who gives you the right to do that? And you think, but we don't need the right. And it's, I've never worked with a non-disabled actor or performer or artist who thought they needed the right. Somebody needed to give them permission to do it. So I think it's a sort of ongoing thing. And without the union membership, there isn't that expectation that I will go into work and I will be treated properly, I will be properly compensated, I will have proper breaks, I will have proper refreshments. And without that, it becomes really inaccessible. And again, I think one of my things over the last 15 years has been diversity is not enough. And that has been until recently the focus of particularly the Arts Council. But it's not good enough to have one wheelchair user. Every wheelchair user's got to be able to get in. It's not enough to have a token person with learning difficulties. Everybody has got to be capable of being included. So yes, I feel like the focus on diversity has also allowed a very sort of polite representation where performers very much at the bottom of the food chain feel like everybody's doing them a favor. Do you think that there is that kind of mindset, and what does equity do to challenge it and to say, look, you have rights, you might not believe it, but you really do have rights?
I think a lot of it is for a lot of deaf and disabled performers, and the general public generally now being in the trade union movement for 10 years. I mean, I come from a different generation to yourself, because I heard you talking about.
Certainly do. I'm 58. I'm 59. I can't even remember.
But I think for my generation and generations after mine, they don't necessarily know what a trade union is to begin with. And they don't know that this body is there to support them and fight for their rights, and be that bigger mass than just themselves. And I think a lot of it is, especially within the deaf and disabled community is going, look, these guys are there. We're not perfect, but we're a downside better than being there on your own. Because I know at the moment Equity is currently going through an internal communications review to make sure that all the communications we put out are going to be more accessible than they ever have been. So Equity is by no means perfect. We acknowledge that, but the work is there to improve. But in turn, we'll improve even more if we've got more deaf and disabled members feeding into the process. Because everybody's access needs are different. My needs as a part-time wheelchair user are different to somebody with a learning disability, or somebody that's neurodiverse, or somebody that's visually impaired, or deaf or hard of hearing. And only their lived experience can feed into the process to improve the union and improve the industry as a whole. I think now that the industry is very much at a turning point. I think now with people like Netflix starting to push the boundaries, and I have to give them credit where it's due, they are starting to push out more deaf and disabled led content. And in turn, because they're doing it, the rest of the industry is going, well, we kind of need to live up to that. And so I think we are at a turning point. But I think the more deaf and disabled talent joins a union, whether it be Back2, Equity, whatever your trade may be, the easier it's going to be to push for that change, because our voice is going to be louder.
Yes, and I think that's the thing about the power of a union, isn't it? It's not just the power it can bring to you, it's the power you can give to it. And people don't realise when they feel very powerless that actually their lived experience is incredibly valuable, and it can help a larger group of people not only support them but support other people in that situation. So the power is very much a two-way thing. We've got exactly 10 minutes left. And one of the things I wanted to introduce was the fact that, this is our film festival. 2 years ago, we developed our D rating system. So this is the third year that our programme will have a D rating. We based that on the F rating system that was developed by Bath Film Festival. And that was, I think, one of the most recent years where there were almost no women nominated for significant Oscars, or certainly not in categories which didn't require them to be a woman. So very broadly, I mean, they have, I think it's 1 F for producer director, 1 F for scriptwriter, 1 F for subject or actor. We sort of make it a bit broader and try and pick out the sort of what they're really getting at, which is who generates the content, who's in charge of the project, and who's in front of the camera. So we give 1D each for that. And if somebody's been facilitated as a disabled person, well, that's absolutely fine. Within that D rating system, what we've noticed, of course, is in terms of Netflix, the amount of, and not just Netflix, because, Amazon have also carried content, but with disabled led content coming from the States for the first time, and the kind of degree of programming that we just simply haven't seen before. But alongside that, we still have this ongoing debate about cripping up. And people say to me, oh, actors act. And I think, yes, but if I see a man playing a woman's role, it has no credibility for me. And if I see a white person blacking up, it's downright or of course it's offensive. But it's the authenticity. And I think there's, however good an actor you are, something descends into mimicry. I was asked by the media a couple of weeks ago to comment on the new Sia film. So it's an American film, but for everybody who, like me, loves dance moms, you will have seen Maddie Ziegler grow up from 6 to 16. And for the last at least 5 years, she's been working with the singer Sia and performing in Sia's videos. So Sia has now brought out a film where the story is all based on her songs. And of course it stars Maddie. Who else would it star? But she decided she was going to make the character autistic. And since the film has come out, it's had a lot of criticism. And she said, oh, it would have been unfair to get somebody with autism to play the part. And I look at my goddaughter, who at the age of 20 does not have autism, but has a number of other impairments, has played Jodie Foster's daughter. No, Jodie Whittaker's daughter in a series where the character did have autism. And you think, no, it's ridiculous. There are loads of young actors that could have played this part, but it was never going to be a part for anybody but Maddie. So then it became this whole thing about, well, I'm using disability as a metaphor. And that still comes along. And again, you know, we had over 1,000 entries in the film festival, but an awful lot was still coming from a very kind of not just victimized place, but every drama had a non-disabled actor in it. And it was, again, it was this sense of, well, it's authenticity. You can only suspend disbelief as an audience just so much. And I think the reason people can still do it is we don't see real disabled actors. And the more we see real disabled actors, the more people will go, I just can't accept this person. You know, I can't accept Eddie Redmayne playing a disabled person because it's just so far from the reality. And again, you know, in this sort of 9 years of the film festival, we've seen films where, you know, you have documentaries, again, quite often somebody working as the director or working with the director and starring in the film and revealing their very different physicality. And then you have films, usually by students, that purport to represent the same thing. And you just can't look at it
No.
and believe in it. It's just, so to me, it's the absence of disabled performers on screen that allows them to be absent, because as soon as you have real people, you just can't believe in the mimicry. And that was the thing about Maddie Ziegler. You know, she's a great performer, but what I see as somebody who knows lots of people and lots of young people who are neurodiverse is mimicry. It's not acting.
No. I mean, you know, I could get into the depths of truth and emotional truth and all those kind of really actory things, but cripping up is the bane of my life. It really is. And I've been on the BBC World Service talking about Eddie Redmayne when the Theory of Everything originally hit. And you know, Equity as a trade union has a policy that we don't want cripping up to happen. That was passed at our annual representative conference a couple of years ago. So it is well within the Deaf and Disabled Members Committee to battle cripping up with a passion, with union support to do so. I would argue to any producer, to any maker of films, because I know hopefully you're watching this right now, is that as well as having the most genuine performance you could have from a disabled performer, you're probably going to save money and make more money by employing a disabled performer to play a disabled role. You're going to save money because you're not going to have to pay Eddie Redmayne or Daniel Radcliffe or anybody some such to learn how to mimic an impairment. And then you're going to make money because the disabled community are going to be more willing to go and see your film because they know the actor in the role is a genuine disabled person. And we're going to want to engage with that content more than ever. And I openly say this to broadcasters on a regular basis when I'm in the room with Equity, with Channel 4, with ITV, with BBC, with Netflix, because everybody knows that the power of the purple pound is huge. Well, everybody that is part of the Purple Pound knows that the Purple Pound is huge. It's about the Purple Pound convincing the rest of the world that the Purple Pound is huge. And it sounds skeptical. It sounds, you know, oh, we'll make the argument about money. But that's how a lot of these big studios work. They're not necessarily making art for the love of it. And I'm not saying that, you know, the directors and the actors and the performers don't love their work, but the studios want to make money. That is their goal. So
one of the things that's always said, of course, is, well, disabled actors don't have the experience. So the final point I wanted to make, because it's something that's struck me quite a lot over the years, is we need to push more for disabled actors in background work, by which I mean, for anybody who doesn't know, if you're watching EastEnders, who's in the market? And that's exactly the kind of experience that gives people not just experience on set, but the ability to prove what they actually already know, which is they're trained, they can follow direction. But I think there's a sense of comfort. You know, I've done a bit of background work myself, sometimes, you know, for money, because as artists we'll do anything for money. And I just wondered, I mean, I know it's not necessary, it's a sort of cross area because there's other groups that represent background artists as well. But I see it as a key way to get more disabled people, not just into the industry at a higher level, because it is always, oh, well, we can't put them into a starring role because they haven't even had a supporting role. Well, they haven't had a supporting role because they haven't had a background role. But it's also about reflecting the reality, because I look at all these backgrounds and I think, but if I go to Stratford, if I go to Beckton, if I go to Asda, any of the local shopping centres, admittedly, I've not seen them since last Christmas, but they're all full of disabled people. There are disabled people everywhere you look. And yet, as soon as I see those scenes on TV, the disabled people are invisible. And I think for a whole range of actors, doing things like idents and getting into background work is a really important way to gain confidence, but also, like I say, CV experience and to get in front of casting agents.
Yeah, I mean, I've been fortunate enough now that I've been doing this for over a decade, and I've been fortunate enough to do theatre work, TV commercial work, the opening ceremony of the Paralympic Games. Like, my CV is wide, varied, and vast. And I would say to any young performer, you can make a living from performing. Just be prepared to do lots of different things. You're not necessarily going to go straight into Hollywood, but if you want to perform, you can make a living from doing so. Also, background artists, just so you're aware, are under the equity remit. Feel free to become a member as a background artist. But yeah, I think the whole argument of disabled talent not having experience, especially now, is really starting to wear thin. I mean, it
I
was thin
think
at the
it
best of
is. I
times.
think what I'm looking for is a pipeline that brings more and more and more disabled talent through. And yeah, I think locally it's just one of those things we've identified as an aspiration. It's more than time than I was concluding. Thank you so much, Dan.
No
We will
worries.
be starting again at 11:05 with our guest from Beck 2. Please do stay with us. The Zoom will stay open. I'm just going to switch off very briefly for a coffee and a changeover. But apologies, I forgot to do the audio description at the beginning. So I have pale olive skin, green eyes, a self-styled corona crop, black plastic glasses, black wrist braces, silver coloured jewellery, a purple sweater I'm wearing for the first time because it's chilly today, and eyes that are practically closed because I think it's that point in a film festival. Well, by the time a film festival opens, the director's never had any sleep, but this is the first time that we've been exposed on a live stream under lights as opposed to being sitting in a back room organising everything. So that's me. So what do you look like, Dan?
I am a 36-year-old male with sort of dark blonde, light brown hair, blue eyes, a stubble type beard. I'm wearing a blue cotton shirt and I'm sat in a gaming chair that's black and red striped in front of a plain black background.
And on that note, I will leave it there and we will be back, I think, a couple of minutes later. So we're going to take a full 10-minute break now, but I will be back on the Zoom very shortly. Thank you so much again, Dan. There definitely is power in a union.
No worries at all. And remember, everybody, whether you're a producer, whether you're an actor, if you want to talk to Equity about terms and agreements, if you want to talk to Equity about becoming a member, head to the website, which is equity.org.uk, and that's
And
got
we'll put
telephone numbers, contact details, and so on and so on.
And what we're going to do is pop up on the festival page, not only those details, but I'm also going to get Dan to send me the direct links to some of those disability specific publications. So on this point, we must let the support workers have a break. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.